Hello and welcome to your new favorite lore podcast, Crash Course Genshin Impact. My name is Frankie, I'll be your host, and I didn't think of something to say or do for this introduction. And you know what? That's on me. That one is on me. Because I know that I'm a person who has ADHD, and if you've seen any of my Twitch streams, you know that very well, probably better than anyone. But if you exclusively know me from TikTok, then you should know that all my lore videos, most if not all of them, some of them I don't, but most of them I do try to do this, I script them before I make them. I don't go off the dome piece almost ever. Because I know this about myself. If I try to go off the dome every single time, it's just going to be nonstop tangents. You should also know that at the time of recording this, it is a Sunday, and I have not taken my ADHD medication. So it's like even worse today. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why I decided this was the way to do it. But let me try and explain as efficiently as I possibly can right now with the present circumstances. Let me try to explain why I decided to do this. I've gotten a lot of comments specifically on TikTok about how they appreciate the way that I talk through the lore, and like I got one comment the other day about somebody listening to my videos while they were studying, and it just made me so happy because my brain often works the same way. Like I can read something as much as I want, but if I either hear somebody say it or I like to read things aloud to myself, that helps it stick in my brain a lot easier. I love a good audiobook. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So upon hearing that, I was like, the first thing I did was I said, okay, I'm going to make audiobooks for Genshin books. And I still plan to do that. I do still plan to do that. I'm working on an audiobook for Heart's Desire right now, which is a book I'm going to get into a little bit later in this episode. But the other thing I thought of was, well, I do a lot of really long TikToks about lore. Maybe, what if I just compiled all of those little lore bites into one big thing? Because I've gotten a lot of people saying, like, you should make really long video essays on YouTube. And I'm like, that's not gonna work for me. That's not how my brain works. I can't go on a tangent for that long, but I can do little lore bites. But you know what I can do? Is I can take all those little lore bites and I can put them all together. And so that's what this is gonna be. I'm still gonna be making my little shtick on TikTok, most likely, going over little lore bits on there. But all of those are gonna be compiled, and maybe I'll have some additional ones that I share only on the podcast. So you have to listen to them, because you never know. I don't think we're going over anything that I haven't gone over on TikTok today, though. Simply because all of the things that I want to talk about are things that I have gone on at length about on TikTok. Specifically today, we're going to go over the primordial one and Istaroth. I wanted to condense these ideas. I do have a few additions to make, but it's largely just going to be, just a little compilation of information that I've already shared. In a format that you can just kind of turn on and go do a little task. That's what I do when I listen to podcasts, and I love that. I love to have a little background noise. This is your background noise while you, I don't know, do the dishes, or like homework, or your Genshin dailies. You can just listen to a little bit of lore. You can learn a little bit of lore. Let me tell you a little bit about the primordial one in Istaroth. This is for story skippers and people who just need a refresher on the Genshin lore alike. This is for everybody. Everyone is welcome here. And yeah, let's just, you know what? Let's just get into it. We're going to get into it now. Let's talk about the primordial one. And let's just see how much less chaotic this is the second I start reading from a script. It'll be great. No, it'll be great. Now, there are like 3 or 2.5 sources that I draw from when talking about what we know about the primordial one. The first source is Volume 2 of the Byakuyakoku collection, also known as Before Sun and Moon. Before Sun and Moon is described as being a chronicle that ordinary folk have been forbidden to read, implying that this book contains forbidden knowledge. Which makes sense, given that this knowledge is the very reason Orobashi, the former serpentine god of the Watatsumi people, was slain by the Raiden shogun for obtaining. Why is that important? Well, at the time of Before Sun and Moon's release, this book was the only information we had about the Primordial One at all. It being forbidden implies that something or someone does not want people to know things about the Primordial One. Before Sun and Moon chronicles the early history of Teyvat, beginning with the appearance of the Primordial One and its defeat of the 7 dragon sovereigns. The Primordial One also created 4 shining shades of itself, but we'll talk about them later. The author of Before Sun and Moon tells us that the Primordial One may have been Phanes, Phanes being a reference to the Greek Phanes, the primordial god of creation. The author doesn't tell us if the reason they're unsure of the Primordial One being Phanes is because 1, there may have been 2 similar entities to speak of, one Primordial One and one Phanes, or 2, they were questioning whether or not the Primordial One had actually created the world. However, the description the author gives of the Primordial One certainly matches the description of the Greek Phanes, birthed from an egg, had wings, androgynous in nature. The author then tells us that the Primordial One used the eggshell to separate the universe and the microcosm of the world. Now, that could be interpreted many different ways. However, I am personally of the opinion that that's describing the creation of the firmament. Hey, what the fuck is a firmament? So glad you asked. For now, just think of the firmament as a protective bubble around a limited portion of Teyvat, namely the 7 nations. Before Sun and Moon goes on to tell us about the creation of the human realm, as well as humanity and the first era of humans in Teyvat. TLDR, everything was great until the second who came appeared and picked a fight with the Primordial One. During this fight, the Earth split in half, and Enkanomiya kind of accidentally fell into the Dark Sea, which is outside of the firmament. And we don't actually know much after that. The author assumes that the Primordial One won that battle, and they're a scribe of one of the 4 shades, so maybe? Probably. Moving on, the second source of information about the Primordial One is the history of the decline and fall of Remuria, a book that was written in the early years of the founding of Fontaine. There are 2 reasons that this book is important. The first reason is that the first volume opens with a story about the first human civilization, and more importantly, the way it was destroyed. Now, Before Sun and Moon contains many references to the biblical flood. The first section of the book is titled When the Doves Held Branches, the first sign of land after the biblical flood. Another section is the year of the ark's opening, another flood reference. Interestingly, the word Teyvat is a Hebrew word meaning ark of or chest of, which comes from the Hebrew word teva, meaning ark or chest. This is important because the destruction of the first human civilization, as described in the decline and fall of Remuria, was done by flood. Enraged by their behavior, heaven sent gigantic waves to smash the settlers' cities. 100 days of rain came afterward, and the roaring tides drowned all sin and irrigation, and thus were the early peoples brought to an end. The rest of this volume describes the founding of Remuria, an ancient civilization led by the god-king Remus. Remus is very important because several sources in the game draw some pretty clear parallels between King Remus and the Primordial One. The first and most obvious, in my opinion, is the Primordial One and its 4 shining shades. King Remus promoted 4 humans of great capability to high post. He shared his power and authority with them, making them his partners in governance, the Harmost for all cities. The Goblet of the Pristine Sea weapon ascension materials also give us some interesting information about Remus, referring to him as the Usurper, which, until now, has been a term almost exclusively used to refer to the Primordial One. But we know the goblets are talking about Remus. The goblets tell us of the usurper, Remus, and his alliance with the first sovereign, whom he met in the Land of Dragons. This is referring to his meeting with Egeria, where she was kept imprisoned in the Primordial Sea and guarded by Scylla, who was known as the Prince of Bishops in his time. This is also where Egeria gifted Remus the very goblet of primordial seawater he would go on to use in the creation of Remuria. We met Scylla in the Remuria World quests, but he's in a different form that looks very similar to the all-devouring narwhal. However, it's explained that that isn't his original form. We also learned through the Remuria World quests that while Scylla was painted to be a traitor by one of the four Harmosts who had become corrupted when the Great Symphony or Phobos became corrupted, the reality was that Scylla and Remus were allies and had a plan to destroy Phobos because it had become corrupted. Now that information, in the context of explicit parallels between Remus and the Primordial One, paints a fascinating picture that directly contradicts things we've been told about the Primordial One conquering the Seven Sovereigns. Now, remember when I said that it seems like someone doesn't want us to know things about the Primordial One? If Remus parallels with the Primordial One, and the four Harmosts are his four shining shades, that would make Scylla, the Prince of Bishops, one of the sovereigns, or perhaps King Nibelung, whom Neuvillette refers to as Heavenly Father. Side note, a lot of people use the terms Heavenly Principles and Primordial One interchangeably. I firmly and completely disagree with that. All I'm gonna say right now is King Remus and Scylla were plotting to destroy the Grand Symphony because it had become corrupted, leading not to the peaceful and harmonious empire Remus had dreamed of, but rather an empire of self-righteous golems who waged war with everyone they deemed inferior to their new ascended forms. If the Primordial One is Remus in this analogy, I firmly believe that the Heavenly Principles are its Grand Symphony, principles or divine laws of destiny that may have been created with or by the Heavenly Father, Nibelung. Heavenly Principles, Heavenly Father. It makes just so much more sense. And remember, the name of this game is Genshin Impact, the original God's Impact. And the Primordial One is not the original god of Teyvat. Alright, with that out of the way, let's talk about Istaroth. Now, Istaroth is the name that I've gotten the most, hey, who the fuck is that comments about on just so many videos that I've made where I mention her. And you know what? That's so fair, because much like the Primordial One and its other shining shades, there isn't a ton we know about her. Speaking of the Primordial One and its shades, we're going to start with Volume 2 of the Byakuyakoku collection, also known as Before Sun and Moon. Because, as far as I'm aware, it's the first explicit reference we get to Istaroth specifically, and where we get the fact that she's one of the four shades. The passage about Istaroth is titled The Third Year of Darkness. We knew the only one who had not forsaken us as the ruler of time. She was the moment. She was every moment. She was the measure of 1,000 winds, and the sun and the moon. We call her Kairos, or the ruler of the unchanging world. We dare not speak her true secret name, and so I pen it here only once, and in reverse. The name penned here, of course, is Istaroth, but backwards. But how does this tell us that she's one of the shades? Well, an earlier passage, the first year of darkness, tells us the prayers of the people turned into lamentations, but the Primordial One and its three other shining shades could not hear. Then this passage tells us that the ruler of time, Istaroth, was the only one who had not forsaken us, making her the fourth shade. Now, the people of Enkanomiya had two ways of referring to Istaroth, one being Kairos, as referenced in that passage, and the other being Tokyo Ukami, which is a name that is also used a lot in the Byakuyakoku collection. Well, how do we know that Tokyo Ukami is another name for Istaroth? Two things come to mind. The first is another section of Before Sun and Moon called The Parable of the Tree. TLDR, the king who in this story represents the Primordial One told this gardener to cut down the spirit tree, but the gardener was in love with the spirit tree. So the gardener goes to the king's priest, who represents Tokyo Ukami, and the king's priest tells him to cut the branches of the spirit tree and plant them. The gardener's like, it's gonna take 500 years for that to grow, and I'll read this part verbatim. The priest said, "Your one thought shall echo through eternity." And so the gardener planted the branches in his backyard. In an instant, the slim branches grow into a new tree, and the new tree spirit was a continuation of the past one. For it is the God of moments who is able to take seeds from this moment into the past and the future. So, first of all, it explicitly refers to Tokyo Ukami as the god of moments, aka Istaroth. But second of all, the parable of the tree is literally exactly what happened with Ei and Makoto and the sacred Sakura, which we will be talking about another time. The second confirmation we have on Istaroth being Tokyo Ukami is Volume 3 of the Byakuyakoku collection. Even in these depths, the power of the undying wind and the water still remain. The personification of the undying wind is known as Tokyo Ukami, and is poetically rendered the 1,000 winds or the 1,000 winds of time. Now that should ring a bell. A very distant bell that is located on a secret island in Mondstadt. Not to mention the existence of the 1,000 Winds Temple, which is also in Mondstadt. Side note, Venti canonically used to be a tiny elemental wind spirit among the 1,000 Winds. So if you were wondering why everyone calls Istaroth Venti's mom, that is why. He was literally one of the 1,000 Winds. This is also probably why there are so many references to Istaroth, the ruler of time, in Mondstadt, and on that secret island that really doesn't want you to interact with it literally at all, and leads you on a wild goose chase after an eye of the storm to keep you away from the secret island. Remember how the author of Before Sun and Moon had to write her name backwards because they dare not speak her true secret name? That's interesting. Moving on from Mondstadt, another major reference to Istaroth comes from one of the many Aranara quests, namely the final chapter, in which Aranaga gifts the traveler a flower they claim is unable to be destroyed by the ad oblivione, or the wind that flows forever, the 1,000 winds that return to one. Side note about the term ad oblivione, I did not realize this until after I had written this script. But if that term is familiar to you, it's because it's the name of one of the songs that plays on Dragonspine. Hello, Istaroth. Stop haunting me. One of the most interesting details about most, if not all, references to Istaroth is this idea of preservation, or more specifically, remaining unchanged over the passage of time. And Kanomiya called her the ruler of the unchanging world. A similar sentiment is found in Heart's Desire, one of the books I reference when talking about Istaroth and foxes, in which the legends and stories this fox-eyed shopkeep collects cannot be changed. Side note, I'll be sharing my thoughts about Istaroth and foxes after my thoughts about Istaroth. It's a very interesting connotation, especially given what we know about Irminsul and the way memories and events and people can just be erased from it completely. This is where I want to tie in an interesting detail from the Remuria World questlines that I had completely missed in my first playthrough, but upon looking back, feels extremely important. Now, I've talked at length about the narrative parallels between the Primordial One and King Remus. First and most obvious that the Primordial One had 4 Shining Shades and King Remus had his 4 Harmosts. As I mentioned in the Primordial One section, King Remus saw how his Grand Symphony had become corrupted and plotted to destroy it. But before he did that, he separated Cassiodor, one of the 4 Harmosts, from the Grand Symphony. So Cassiodor could act of his own free will and lead the Remurians acting on blind faith in the corrupted symphony. What does that have to do with Istaroth? Well, we know that Istaroth was the only shade that did not abandon Enkanomiya when they fell into the Dark Sea, a place beyond the protection of the Seven and, more importantly, outside the firmament. Not only that, Istaroth has seemingly acted as a guide that directly interacts with humanity throughout Tevat's history. There are references to her everywhere. Oh shit, I didn't think of how I'd do this. Okay, so there's this symbol, alright? Hear me out. There's this symbol. Do you remember the Conria star? Like the 8-pointed star that's on the Conria door and on every Conrian's outfit? That looks suspiciously like the Natlan symbol? That looks suspiciously like these Light Realm sigils from that one Enkanomiya event in 2.5 that is described as being a mark symbolizing the recognition of Enkanomiya's Tokyo Ukami? Yeah, so that's a symbol of Istaroth. And if you look closely, that thing is everywhere in Tevat. In my Primordial One recap, I suggested that King Remus's plot to destroy the Grand Symphony could be foreshadowing an attempt by the Primordial One to destroy the Heavenly Principles. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the heavenly principles, the divine laws of Tevat, are in some way connected to Irminsul. And if any of the shades were removed from Irminsul before this plan could be put into motion, it would make the most sense for that shade to be Istaroth, because the memories and stories within Irminsul can be erased, but the stories and legends that Istaroth collects cannot. Speaking of Istaroth, have you noticed that a lot of Mondstadt books reference foxes with the power of time manipulation? Let me explain. This all started with reading A Drunkard's Tale, in which a wind spirit, like one of the 1,000 winds, turned into a fox and invented wine? Kind of. One day, a wily wind spirit noticed that the grossly negligent guard was once again being grossly negligent. So the spirit took the form of a fox and crept into a pile of wild apples. There it caused yeast to grow, ripening the apples and causing them to ferment. The grossly negligent guard was ravenous when he returned and elected to partake of one of the apples. The mellow taste of fermented fruit delighted both his body and his mind. Immediately, he took animal hide and squeezed the juice from the apples, creating wine. Side note, that is the most venti story I have literally ever heard. But after reading this, I had a theory that foxes might be associated with Venti or Istaroth or both, so I kept reading and... Guys, of the Mondstadt books I have read so far, A Drunkard's Tale, The Boar Princess, The Fox and the Dandelion Sea, and Heart's Desire all reference foxes to varying degrees of story involvement. Now, The Boar Princess is a bit of an outlier here because there is little to no reference to time fuckery, but the fox in this story is importantly referred to as the Wise Fox. That's not to say I don't think the story of the Boar Princess is hiding something or many things, but that's a topic for another day. Now, folklore about foxes is pretty vast, often portraying foxes and fox spirits as harmless tricksters, helpful guides, or even symbols of the devil in some cases. At first, I was hesitant to link an association with tricksters to Istaroth, but then I looked at Venti, and then I stopped hesitating because that shitty little bard is the definition of a trickster god. So next we have The Fox and the Dandelion Sea, a story of a hunter from Mondstadt who falls in love with a woman who is also a white fox with a fox son. The hunter teaches the fox son to speak human in exchange for learning fox magic, aka the ability to transform. When the time comes, the fox woman turns him into a dandelion and blows him away, and he wakes up at the lake the story starts at, and it's time fuckery. The story began with the hunter commenting that the lake reminded him of the eyes of this girl he once loved, and then he proceeds to always comment on how the fox woman's eyes are familiar and compares them to the lake and to gemstones, and then at the end of the story he wakes up and makes the exact same comment about the lake, implying that the girl he loved was the fox woman before he ever met the fox woman because of time fuckery. So, dandelions, time fuckery, a white fox. You got that? Finally, we have Heart's Desire. Now, this book is interesting. It features a strange little antique shop that seemingly exists outside of time and space, and each volume provides different bizarre directions on how to get there. And in each of them, the shopkeep is a woman with fox-like eyes with slender lines for pupils. And that point about her eyes is reiterated almost every single time the shopkeep speaks or is referred to at all. Now, right off the bat, a woman with fox eyes and a shop that exists outside of time and space who provides guidance and somehow the exact object that every single customer is seeking, most often without the customer even specifying what exactly they want, and is definitely a trickster in her own right. You see where I'm going with this. At the end of the third volume, we get a list of the many legends and stories the shopkeep has collected over time. Stories about a dandelion sea, or these 3 moon goddesses. Wait, hang on. What? But here's what I found most interesting. Volume 3 ends with this passage. One thing she knew for certain was that even if she were to abandon these objects, the legends attached to them would not disappear, and the way the stories ended could not be undone. in which case it seemed to make sense to collect all the legends and stories she could in her shop. So, not only is this fox-eyed shopkeep collecting stories, the stories she collects cannot be changed. That is interesting. Here's my theory. Istaroth, for whatever reason, and believe me, I have thoughts about that reason, has separated herself from the heavenly principles, or, as I mentioned earlier in the Istaroth section, was separated from the heavenly principles, potentially by the primordial one. But I don't think that's all. I think she's been separated from Irminsul, meaning any stories she collects will not be subjected to Irminsul edits. They will not change. Remember Before Sun and Moon? Because it was written by a scribe of Istaroth. But Frankie, there's no precedent in Genshin for a trickster foxwoman with a passion for literature. Yes, there is, and it's Yae Miko. Yes, by the way, I am saying that Genshin's kitsune are probably in some way connected to Istaroth, and yes, I'm saying that a lot of things we know about Yae Miko could potentially be hints about Istaroth. If you need more proof, Yae Miko is related by blood to the Hakushin clan, or the White Dawn clan of kitsune. Another member of the Hakushin clan you may know was Kitsune Saigu, who was famously a white fox. Kind of like the fox in the Dandelion Sea. Not to mention that from Tokiali Tales, we know that the kitsune are not native to Inazuma. That's fascinating, isn't it? And there you have it. That is the long and the short of my current thoughts about the Primordial One in Istaroth. I am going to freestyle for a little bit at the end here because I've gained some new information and thoughts since I wrote these scripts. And you may be thinking, why didn't you just add them to the scripts before you read them? I didn't think to, so I'm not going to do that. And I've already read them, so you know what? Why not? But I did want to share this because I think it's interesting. This has to do with the world quest in Ochkanatlan, so if you haven't gotten through that already, I would wait to listen to this until you do, because spoilers, that's your warning. So my thoughts have to do with a conversation we have with the dragon sage, Wahaklakun Ubakan, in the Memories of Ochkan from 500 years ago. Not sure how that works. Not sure how we were able to have a conversation with the dragon sage via his son's memories, but I'm not gonna question it. He seems like a sneaky fellow that has some weird powers. Who's to say? Anyway, he brings up something interesting that can be proven if you do a little digging. And it's that he is able to wear souls as masks and has done so throughout history and continues to do so. And this can be proven because two figures that we see in Ochkan's Memories of 500 years ago are guys named Legba and Titu. Now, if those names sound familiar to you, it's because they are NPCs that are guys that you can meet in Natlan right now. Literally, right now. Titu is near the Children of Echoes. He's the guy that you talk to and guides you when you do the Shadowpins world quest. Legba can be found at the Ancestral Temple and also guides you through a world quest. So they shouldn't have been there 500 years ago, implying that the Legba and Titu that we know now are simply masks that the dragon sage is wearing in order to blend in. Now, if you talk to Legba, you don't really get anything about that. However, if you talk to Titu, he does have something interesting to say. One of the dialogue options now is, I saw you in Ochkanatlan, and this is what he says if you choose it. What? Me? You must be joking. I've never been there, that's for sure. I am simply a storyteller from the Children of Echoes. Titu is just a name. Anyone can be called Titu. Perhaps the one you saw was someone using that name. And that makes me another one who is using it, of course. So, like, the most vague and ominous response that he could have possibly given us. That is the Dragon Sage, right? Are we all in agreement that that guy is literally just the Dragon Sage? That's the Dragon Sage, right? That's definitely the Dragon Sage. Now, why I find this interesting and why I want to mention it while talking about Istaroth is specifically because if you look at both T2 and Legba's models, they have something in common, and it's that they both have golden eyes. Why is that important? Well, I want to talk to you about Kitsune for a second, who I do believe are strongly linked, if not directly linked, to Istaroth. Kitsune are often described as white foxes with golden eyes. And golden eyes is something that comes up a lot. There is even a case to be made for the fox in the Dandelion Sea who has eyes that remind this hunter of a lake also having golden eyes. But Frankie, lakes are blue. Yes, however, Cider Lake in Mondstadt is named Cider Lake because at, was it sunset or sun? I don't remember what time. But at a certain time, the water looks golden like cider. So there's a precedent to be set for golden eyes being connected to Istaroth. I'm not saying the Dragon Sage is Istaroth. Let me make that clear. However, the concept of wearing souls as masks is really, really interesting to me. Because I have a sneaking suspicion, given the Shopkeepin' Heart's desire, with fox-like eyes with slender lines for pupils, slender lines for pupils being something found in foxes and also in many reptiles, the parallels are paralleling. Again, and I think the Dragon Sage might be another hint at Istaroth and what she's been up to. Because if any other figure in the game so far feels like a massive fucking trickster with plans, it is Wahaklakun Ubakan, or the Dragon Sage. And I swear, that is my actual final thoughts, okay? That's it. That's all I got. Thank you so much for listening to Crash Course Genshin Impact. I also didn't think of an ending for this other than I have a headache now, and I need to go lay down on the floor for a minute. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next time on Crash Course Genshin Impact.